for years, the right siloed energy. Yes, it was important. Yes, it was even interesting. But other than a handful of exceptions, energy was not seen as central to political debate and to America's future. The left never made this mistake. They understand that energy is power, political power, the power to plan the economy and to control society. Happily, those exceptions include the 45th and 47th President of the United States. President Trump's doctrine of energy dominance represents a true revolution in energy policy and in conservative political thinking. To show you why, I'd like to take you to the country that is ground zero of net zero, Britain, and explain how the Greens' war on fossil fuels and the mass deployment of wind and solar has given Britain the privilege of having the highest energy prices in the world in exchange for having a dangerously fragile electrical grid that is accelerating deindustrialization and destroying the British economy. I will conclude with some more general observations applicable to both sides of the Atlantic. First, a little on the political context in Britain, the policy context. In 2008, Parliament passed the Climate Change Act, imposing a duty on the government to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, a target that in 2019 was raised to 100%, i.e. net zero. In parallel, there was a huge push for wind and solar. In 2007, Tony Blair, attending his last European summit, legally committed Britain to the most demanding renewable energy target in the EU. The European push for renewables originally came from Germany. They wanted to create a world-leading solar PV industry, which they did in China, not in Germany. There was, however, another reason. The German obsession with renewable energy has dark roots within German culture and the German soul. It happens to be a historical fact that the first political party anywhere in the world to have a wind power program was the NSDAP in 1933, better known to the rest of the world as the Nazis. Imported into Britain, renewables were enthusiastically adopted and cheered on by the British political and media elites, without any thought given to what they would do to the energy that everyone relies on. The fundamental measure of the reliability of a country's electrical grid is the amount of dispatchable generating capacity it has. Dispatchable because the grid operator can dispatch power on demand. So we're talking about coal, natural gas, nuclear, and to a certain extent, hydropower. Britain's dispatchable capacity peaked in 2010, when there was very little wind and solar. For every 1 gigawatt of wind and solar, there was nearly 20 gigawatts of coal, gas, nuclear, and a smattering of hydro. Then, in a reckless display of green virtue signalling, the politicians decided to power past coal. Coal-fired capacity went from nearly 24 gigawatts in 2010 to 0 last year. But the coal-fired power stations that were blown up, literally blown up, go on YouTube and you can see the Energy Secretary, Alok Sharma, blowing one up. One thing you will never see Chris Wright doing. That capacity wasn't replaced by any new dispatchable capacity. Except for hydro, all types of dispatchable capacity fell, including gas and nuclear. Overall, the amount of dispatchable capacity fell by nearly 40%. At the same time, there was a massive increase in wind and solar. Having taken 33 gigawatts of dispatchable capacity off the grid, at the same time, billions and billions of wind and solar subsidies saw 45 gigawatts of wind and solar come onto the grid. So that last year, for every 1 gigawatt of wind and solar, there were only 1.3 gigawatts of dispatchable energy. This year, it could be 1-to-1 or even worse. Now, this matters for 3 reasons. Number one, the more wind and solar on the grid, the higher the risk of blackouts. Think of Spain and Portugal earlier this year, Texas in 2021, and California multiple times. Two, Britain no longer generates enough electricity to meet its own needs. In 2010, imported electricity accounted for only 2% of demand. In 2024, imports accounted for very nearly 16% of demand. Britain's supply of electricity depends on the fickleness of the weather and the kindness of strangers. Three, renewables destroy the productivity and the efficiency of the grid. In 2009, 1 megawatt of generating capacity produced just over 4,000 megawatt hours of electricity. In 2024, 1 megawatt produced only 2,586 megawatt hours, a stunning 37% decline. The whole grid numbers are even more shocking. In 2009, 87 gigawatts of generating capacity with virtually no wind or solar produced 356 terawatt hours of electricity. In 2024, 100 gigawatts, comprising nearly 50% of wind and solar, produced only 270 terawatt hours. A 15% increase in capacity generated 24% less electricity. So here we come to the first law of the energy transition. You need more to produce less. The inefficiency and intermittency of renewables that crushes grid productivity pushes up electricity costs for everyone. It's why the energy transition makes people poorer. So we come to the second law of the energy transition. The energy transition is an energy regression. Pushing up costs annihilates the competitiveness of high productivity sectors of the economy, driving deindustrialization. In a 2022 paper, the economic historian Nicholas Crafts shows that in the period 2007 to 2019, Britain had its lowest peacetime growth rate since 1780. That's just 4 years after the Declaration of Independence, with an unprecedented deterioration in trend productivity growth. This has profound geopolitical implications. Peace through strength requires having a strong economy. At the NATO summit 10 weeks ago, Britain promised to spend 5% of its GDP on defence by 2035. I'll let you into a little secret. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because an economy being asphyxiated by net zero cannot generate the resources for economic growth and the resources needed for defence. Rearming means reindustrializing, and reindustrializing means recarbonizing. Europe cannot deter the threat to its east at the same time as it's spending trillions of euros fighting climate change. It's one or the other. This is the theme of my new book, The Age of Error. I'm about this close to submitting the manuscript to Encounter Books. Essentially, you have net zero believers who say history has ended and the existential threat is to avert a planetary catastrophe caused by climate change. That's what Barack Obama and John Kerry, if anyone remembers them, thought. History has not ended. History, the rise and fall of great powers, continues. Climate change has not cancelled geopolitics. I was fortunate enough to talk about my book to the eminent historian David Price-Jones. David fixed me in the eye and said one word: why? Why is the most important question of all. Part of the answer, the less interesting part, is money and rapacious green rent-seeking. You saw the legions of lobbyists swarming Capitol Hill and the Heritage Foundation, trying to pull the teeth from the one big beautiful bill to keep billions and billions of dollars of renewable subsidies. The other part is ideology. Ideology does two things. Ideology empowers. It empowers extremism. There is a certain logic to extremism and its recourse to blackmail, even, in fact, because the premise of the blackmail is false. In the case of communism, You are a class enemy because you are threatening the prospect of creating a workers' paradise on Earth. You're being carted off to the gulag or worse. In the case of climate change, you are a climate denier and risking a planetary catastrophe for our kids and grandkids. You have been cancelled. This is the mechanism by which Europe capitulated to the extreme policy of net zero, which, let's not forget, was the policy of the United States government until noon on January the 20th, 2025. Ideology empowers, but ideology also imprisons. In his superb book, How to Run the World, on the Kremlin's bid for global power during the Cold War, Sergei Rudenchko describes the Soviet leader Yuri Andropov flailing around, trying to find ways to pull the Soviet economy out of its death spiral. He orders his lieutenants to look for ways out of this situation. The communist leadership had absolutely no idea what to do. When I first read this, I was dumbstruck. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, is Yuri Andropov. Growth, Starmer says, is his number one priority. But like the communist leadership, he has no idea how to bring growth about. He wants a strategy for growth, but cannot see that net zero destroys economic growth. The same is true of the EU. Like Starmer, they are all trapped by net zero and green ideology. This has profound implications for the United States and the Atlantic Alliance. Britain and the other nations of Europe cannot be reliable allies and strategic partners to the United States, let alone defend their own continent, for as long as they remain trapped by net zero. When Keir Starmer visited the president at his Turnberry golf course in Scotland, President Trump dropped truth bomb after truth bomb on the craziness of wind power and the stupidity of not exploiting Britain's North Sea oil and gas reserves. President Trump understands that when it comes to destructive ideologies, you fight fire with fire. It's how in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan won the Cold War and Margaret Thatcher defeated socialism in Britain. And today, no one does it better than Donald Trump, because once again, the new world is being called to come to the rescue of the old, this time to free it from the bondage of net zero. Thank you.